Hi there, welcome to another strategic thinking series. We continue the theme today where we're talking about core processes, or what are considered to be core processes for a vendor management office. We've already covered segmentation in a previous video. Today we're going to talk about performance scoring and the importance of that. Okay, so what is performance scoring? So essentially it's a consistent way to engage with and score vendor performance. And ideally it relates to a set of consistent topics. So I'll get onto this shortly, but there's been some good writing by the likes of Gartner, some decent frameworks that you want to be considering a consistent way to engage and score your vendor or supplier beyond that of just asking them, how is it going? Or asking the people who work with the vendor internally, how do you think it's going? And can take into consideration things like contractual structure. So what are they meant to do for you and what's the structure of that contract, and score them on multiple points around that. Also take into consideration strategic goals for your organisation and what the vendor is doing to align and help you with the delivery of those strategic goals. And also the services that the vendor provides and the quality around those services. Can they help you more than they are today? Should they help you less than they are today? Is there any value you're engaging with them further or less? So ultimately that should come down to some kind of framework or some kind of structure that can be, at its core, a set of limited categories and subcategories that you score the vendor against. So what could that look like? So from a performance scoring perspective and a maturity indicators, I always like to use the CMMI model. It's a 5-step model, helps go from ground zero, nothing, in which they call initial, all the way up to optimized. In this case, when you apply it to scoring, the sort of things we look for and you could take into consideration is if you're initial level, you're doing nothing, right? You're just gaining verbal feedback, like I said. So you're engaging with either the supplier or the people that work with the supplier in the business on a day-to-day basis. And your performance scoring is, how's it going? How do you think it's going? And then there's an arbitrary discussion around how the vendor is perceived. Normally that goes back to a relationship level on how the people working with the people on the other side get on. If they get on well, it can overshadow the actual quality of the things that are being delivered, because it's people centric, right? People buy from people serving people. It's, do I like the guy or girl on the other side, and how is that received? Can overshadow, are they actually doing good in what they're meant to be doing, and are they getting the outcomes to the business that's been envisaged? Next stage, managed. So you have some kind of net promoter score. A lot of retail companies use this. A net promoter score is essentially made up of, would you recommend them to someone else? And if you score that on a scale of 10, it's only 8, 9, 10, I think, that are scoring in that. So you get a net promoter score. Sometimes it can be in the minus figures, etc. Or some organisations we've seen use CSAT, so customer satisfaction. And there's a few questions, 5 or 6 questions around customer satisfaction. Typically sent out in a survey, SurveyMonkey, MS forms kind of thing. No ability really to collate the feedback at scale, but that said still gives them a perception of survey scoring. So send that out to a nice amount of people engaged with that vendor and the vendor themselves, and you get something called like 360 scoring, 360 loop feedback scoring, which when you put it all together, you can then say, well, that's the CSAT score collectively or as an average against all those questions for that supplier stroke vendor. You can then say, what are the averages, all the people that are in the buyer side or the business that are consuming or working with that supplier, and you can do the same thing with what the supplier thinks, and you can have an analysis and some views against that, each side or even as a collective. Third is defined. So this is kind of what I was indicating on the first slide, which is you've got a vendor management framework. Light in this case, there's a few categories, few subcategories, but a consistent application. How are they perceived on price? How are they perceived on delivery? How are they perceived on actions? How are they perceived on collaboration? How are they perceived on providing strategic advice? A number of categories that you can put across the board. If you have a consistent set of categories, you can look at your entire supplier landscape collectively and say, how are all the suppliers together are they performing? How are they performing in a certain sourcing category? How are they performing collectively in a certain business unit? And then all the way down to the individual supplier, and then below that the individual contract and the individual services they provide. You can get a consistent view, which is why that step 3 in our stage, that defined level, is kind of the minimum baseline you want to start at, because that unlocks much more insight for the company by being able to look at the vendor landscape by those demographics, either sourcing category, service category or business unit. Next one is quantitatively managed, so a vendor management framework that is industry and best practice aligned. So you might want to, depending what best practice you are aligned to as a company, sometimes ISOs, sometimes SOC, sometimes NIST in a cybersecurity perspective as an example, and it's dynamic based on the supplier and what the supplier provides. So you have that core set that I just mentioned in slide 3, but you might have your IT cloud suppliers have a bolt-on framework for what you'd want to score them against as a clouds provider in IT sense, right? So you might have an additional bit for those type of suppliers, and you change that framework based on what the supplier is providing you with. And the fifth and final one is optimizing, scoring that's integrated into all activities. So you don't necessarily have to, or you can do, and you can use that as an additional source, reach out with things like NPS or CSAT surveys periodically. What you do is all the actions, the meetings that are taking place, the risks that are being managed, and you'll need a platform to do this, of course, as you would definitely with level 4 and probably with level 3 as well to do it at any kind of scale. But on level 5, you need a platform whereby you can engage, whoever's engaging with the supplier can score their interaction and then categorize it against the framework. So we were talking about price today. There were some actions taken on price. How did they do? Measure it out of a 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 score level, and then that over time just collates. The platform does that for you. Everyone using the platform, the supplier included, does scoring, and there's automated scoring based on was it overdue? Did it deliver what was expected? Has it got all the checks and balances? Has it got the evidence trail that's in there? That's a very systematic way of doing it. And over time, that contributes into the scoring of the supplier. So you can get to a point in time where you can say, how did they do over the last 3 months based on just the engaged work that we've done with them? And it'll automatically give you a score. You won't have to go out for a survey. You can, of course, do a survey on top of that to get actual people's opinions at that point in time, quarterly, half yearly, whatever you want to. But that's what we consider level 5 to look like, where you don't actually have to do the NPS or CSAT surveys. It's all being done and collated for you by the use of a digital platform. That was a second process we've done in this strategic thinking set about core processes. Please give us your feedback, any thoughts and feelings on that, anything you think I've missed. Be happy to engage and talk you through some more, or actually come and talk to you about anything you think we should be adding. Thank you.
To keep up with the latest Brooklyn vendor assurance news, subscribe here and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Links in the description below.